Greetings and salutations, Internet Dozens. It is Wolfphototech, and here we are with another delightful video. This time I'm going to do a quick overview of this book. This is actually a translated version of a TTRPG from Japan, based on an anime and manga. I just simply picked this up because I'm fascinated by the different systems that people come up with, and the history of TTRPGs, as well as playing them. I do happen to know some friends that might be interested in playing this. However, they're pretty deep into other campaigns and other systems currently, so planning out and scheduling such a thing would be difficult. Now, you notice that there's something really interesting about this book. It's in the size of a digest or a novel size book. This is because this is the standard in Japan. Unlike most unlike the United States and Europe, or even the rest of the world, Japanese never really got into using big books like us when it comes to use or TTRPGs. This is actually a Spectacular Settlements by Nord Games. That's actually a pretty good book, like 400 pages. Because at the very beginning of the TTRPG hobby, or TRPG hobby, as it says here, and I've had a person actually tell me that the common term for that in Japan is talking role-playing game, or table talky. So that was a rather fascinating bit of information. But anyways, when TTRPGs first started coming out in Japan, a lot of people who made them within Japan, and even in Asia in general, but particularly Japan, instead of printing them out in big books, they would print them out in these little books because these are easier to carry or transport. They take up less space on the shelf and everything else. And it just happens to fit their shelf space better in Japan. It's cheaper. They tend to be all soft covers. They tend to be on the thick side, but not too thick. This is actually a pretty interesting system. As typical for a lot of these books, there's only a few pages that are color in the front to give you some quick idea of the vibrant colors of a world before it goes to just the cheap pages. And this is pretty standard for most Japanese TRPGs. Now, the most important thing of it all is right in the front, there's the little, the standard information. But the first thing that goes into, after the contents and the staff, it goes into a section called the replay section. Now, this is a really interesting phenomena within Japan, that it's not unusual for there to be actual books, just straight up books made called replays, where it's literally the replays written down of players' adventures within a TTRPG or TRPG. So this is one of those interesting phenomena within Japan. The closest equivalent in the Western world is lit RPGs. A lit RPG, if you look it up on Amazon, you can actually find a whole bunch of them. But a lit RPG is basically a novel written as if it is a TTRPG. This, on the other hand, is the other way around. It is the transcribed notes of an actual game. And there might actually be some that are not of actual games, but written in the format. As such as, you got GM, and the GM will talk, and then there will be Blitz, Keva, what is it? And then the GM will reply, and then there's a reply all, oh, and then the GM and the character, and continues forth. This is an incredibly popular, as I said, replay books are so popular. There's literally a little industry of them in Japan, and they are so popular. In fact, in this book actually, from page 7 all the way up to 86, page 86, is nothing but retelling an adventure in game. Oh, 85. So that much of the book is literally just a replay section going over someone's adventure. Now, ever so often, in the replay section, it'll actually have a little box out section. Oh. Should I turn that on? A little boxed out section with common terms within the game world or the mechanics, explaining the mechanics of the game, as well as a little limited map of the combat. Interestingly enough, it's often depicted as in like a tier, as such as a video game RPG. In here, now there's some artwork of a frog eating a person. But anyways, yeah, as I said, throughout the replay section, there is a section there's little box sections. Ever so often, they talk about mechanics. So as you go through the replay section, you'll see terms come up, and then on a next page or the very same, the next page over, it will simply talk about the mechanics that are related to what the characters are doing. So let's blast past the replay section. As I said, that goes up to like page 85 or something. And you go up into the character section. Now, the important note on this is that this is a D6 system, because D6s are basically the standard TTRPG dice in Japan. And the reason for that is because D6s are commonly used in gambling or other general board games and stuff like that, and not TTRPG dice like D20s, D10s, D12s, D4s are not so common, particularly early on when TTRPG started becoming popular in Japan. So almost all TTRPGs in Japan are based around a D6 system. So they're pretty decidedly old school. Also note that this is very important to note. TTRPGs are in Japan are very, very OSR-esque, really, really old school. A lot of them tend to be they're colorful anime games, but they are really brutal anime games. A good example would be like Goblin Slayer. They tend to beat you up, and they tend to be pretty thick in the information department for character sheets. So they're actually like a weird situation where they have the feel of an OSR, an old school Renaissance game, where they're pretty brutal on stuff, but they have that late 80s, 90s heavy mechanics, heavy player sheet orientation. So there you go. They really love their math. This section, at the beginning of the character section, explains the basic concepts of TRPGs, like what is a game master, terminology, stuff. Explains that it is a D6 system right here. This book basically contains everything. All the essential concepts like HP, MP, NPC, PC, character level, class, starter class, advanced class, skill, experience points, session, dice, abilities, score, blessings, free action, minor action, move action, major action, round progression, isekai, in-universe time period, Axel, Adventurer, Adventurer's Guild, Inn, Stables, Kingdom of Belzig, Goddess Aqua, Axis Disciplines, Goddess Eris, Eris Disciplines, Crimson Magic Clan, Monsters, the Demon King, the Demon King's Forces, and Hero. And it goes over there's not just the little tiny explanation and the term on this page, but it repeats over in deeper depth, greater depth through next few pages. So everything is covered here. It goes over the anatomy of the character sheets and how to quickly start such a game. You go through the basic classes. And you have a nice piece of artwork accompanied with each sheet. It's actually, the character sheets are horizontal on here. For the example, you got a section on deciding your backgrounds, origin table, circumstance tables, goal tables, construction, the entire step-by-step process of how to construct your character, which is not very OSR. As I said, that Japanese TRPGs are more OSR in the toughness of the system, but they are more 90s in the complexity. So there's an interesting cross-section there. They have instructions on how to read skills in here. They go through some examples of races, reincarnated person, some abilities and talents, Crimson Magic Clan, starter class, they got a starter class adventurer, warrior, they got some abilities here that you can use with each one. You got a priest, wizard, thief. And this kind of actually reminds me, these card sections actually kind of remind me of 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. And then you have some special subclasses in here that have a few abilities tied into them, like sword fighter, or I do believe they're called advanced classes, which is basically an upgrade on your regular one, and so forth, like archwizard, assassin. You have a section on items. How to read item data. There's an entire table with all the classifications. You got a lot of weapons. This entire section is pretty much nothing but weapons. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different melee weapons, hand to hand, like gloves or gauntlets, to beat up your opponents. Then you have like 10 daggers, about 10 one-handed swords, 10 two-handed swords, 10 axes, some 10 or 15 different clubs, 10 or 15 different spears, 10 different whips, 10 different bows, and so forth, and like 10 different shields. Then you have an armor section. So they really cram it full of stuff. Then they go into the section on cheats, which is tied into the isekai genre. You know, it's usually like some kind of special power or that allows them to hack a bit of reality. Like you always revive whenever you die. You can instantaneously teleport to any place you have been in the past. You can eat something and gain its powers, and so forth. And then it goes into the action check rules. This is basically the how to play section. You essentially get 2 different how to play sections. You get the replay section in the front that gives you the experience, and then throws in terminology. And then you get the how to play section, which is basically the rules section, which basically explains all the mechanics in greater depth. Your different actions. You got 2 pages of that. You got a order of process of organizing the post events, your movement, and so forth. List of debuffs, blessing rules, character growth, which is basically your leveling up rules. You got a world section, which explains the world in which your characters are in. Axel, the starter town. Then it has a guide on the characters from the manga and anime and their personality traits and so forth, which is only like 2 pages. Then you have a little Game Master section in the back, just right after the page 259 is the Game Master section. And it goes through that, and then it goes into various mechanics of how to purify things. It has enemy skills and such. You have various monsters in here, like Giant Toad, Goblin Leader, Zombie Maker, and so forth. Scarosaurus, Slime, One Punch Bear, Manticore, Newbie Killer, Griffin, Toad King. And it goes into traps and objects. Explosive traps, walls, doors, ceiling, floor. It's all itemized. Then you have this little section back here, which is a scenario section, which is basically all nothing but mini adventures for your characters to play through. Then you have a section, an appendix section back here. And then you have the character sheets. And I say this is actually quite interesting as a game overall. If I remember correctly, this was not terribly expensive to buy. $20 United States. Which is, I believe that's kind of the standard pricing for most Japanese TRPGs. They usually tend to be on the cheaper side. There's like 100 of them in Japan. There's usually one based on each anime. There's like 5 or 6 for Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Balls GT. It's important to note that in Japan, Dungeons and Dragons, if you were to rank popularity of TTRPGs or TRPGs in Japan, Dungeons and Dragons is probably like number 30 on the list. There's like 30 places just above Dungeons and Dragons that carpet nuke D&D straight into a hole in the ground. D&D has hardly any fan base in Japan. The most popular Western TRPG in Japan is Call of Cthulhu. I don't have my Call of Cthulhu book over here. I moved it back to its pile over there. Which is not even number 1. Sword World is the number 1 TRPG in Japan. The current edition is 2.5. I think at one point in time, an older edition was translated into English for Western markets, but that was a limited production. But I do believe there's been people who have been interested in producing or publishing Sword World 2.5 for Western markets, which would be really neat if that was the case that come to happen. So, I'm hard to say what a score I would attach to this, but this is essentially a all-in-one core rulebook that includes not just a live play rehearsal of an actual game, but the essential character creation rules, spells, character sheets, explanation of all the core mechanics and general mechanics. It has a game master world lore section or a campaign setting section. It also has a game master section. It happens to also have a bestiary in it as well. It also includes scenarios for your players to play through. So that is pretty cool. I am not an expert in these things. I learned what I can with the time and energy I do have. And I say this is actually quite interesting, and at some point maybe even worth actually truly playing through. This might, considering it's only $20, it's like, this is like 4 stars here. This is like, if you have anime fans, or anime or manga fans that are interested in playing through a isekai TTRPG or TRPG, this is probably something that's well worth trying out. If not this, they could try out Goblin Slayer, the TRPG. Yet again, as I said before, these books are chonky. The Goblin Slayer TRPG is well over 600 pages. So they crammed a whole lot of love into this book. I have a video on this channel covering it, much like in my standard overview style. But anyways, you just see the difference between the two. This is Konosuba, God's Blessing on This Wonderful World TRPG right here. It's basically a third of the Goblin Slayer book. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you do, please leave a like on it and subscribe and check out my other videos. If I come across any more of those, if I can get my hands on any more translated versions of Japanese TRPGs, I will definitely cover them on the channel. I do have an American TRPG that's based on a Japanese franchise from my childhood that's coming up in the future, as well as a few other small things. But we'll see when we get to that point. Have a delightful day, a nice night, a wonderful week, and a magnificent month, and see you next time.